Welcome back, and now for the news in detail. We start our news bulletin from Pakistan, where army says India is trying to divert global attention from its blunders by leveling baseless accusations against Islamabad. In a press briefing, in Rawalpindi, military spokesperson Major General Babar Iftikhar said, driven by extremist Hindutva ideology, India is violating international laws in occupied Kashmir and along the line of control. General Iftikhar said India's attempt to connect Muslims and Pakistan to the spread of the coronavirus has failed. The spokesman said Pakistan's military has played a vibrant role in the country's fight against COVID-19. General Iftikhar said the armed forces are securing the country's borders as well as helping establish screening and quarantine facilities. He also thanked China for playing a pivotal role by donating tons of medical equipment to Pakistan for its fight against the pandemic. Meanwhile, in Pakistan, the number of coronavirus cases has jumped past 11,000, with nearly 650 infections reported in the last 24 hours. The Health Ministry said 13 more people have died, bringing the toll to 237. The ministry said 2,527 patients have recovered from the disease so far. It said the ratio of the locally transmitted cases is at 79%, while the tally of active cases is almost 8,400. Meanwhile, US President Donald Trump has pledged to provide ventilators to Pakistan for coronavirus victims. In a briefing, President Trump said Pakistan has asked to send ventilators and he has agreed to do so. Spain has recorded the lowest number of daily deaths from the coronavirus in over a month, with 367 killed overnight. Elsewhere, Iran has reported 93 new deaths, increasing the total to 5,574. In the US, more than 3,000 people have died in the last 24 hours, bringing the death count to nearly 50,000. The worldwide death toll has crossed 190,000, with over 2.7 million people infected. Details in this report.
Scientists across the world are speeding up efforts to study the novel coronavirus in order to develop a vaccine. U.S. government researchers have revealed the virus survives best indoors and in dry conditions. They say COVID-19 loses potency when temperatures and humidity rise, and especially when it is exposed to sunlight. President Donald Trump said the findings should be interpreted cautiously, but predicted people will be eager to leave the house by summer.
To keep America gaining momentum, every citizen needs to maintain the vigilance, and we all understand that very well. We've gone over it many, many times. This includes practicing good hygiene, maintaining social distance, and the voluntary use of face covering.
Governments around the world are cautiously retreating lockdown measures under immense economic pressures. South Africa will partially reopen the economy on May 1st, easing travel restrictions. Meanwhile, over in Asia, Indonesia and the Philippines have extended the lockdowns. Philippines President Rodrigo Duterte says the capital Manila will be under restrictions until May 15th. The country has one of the world's strictest community quarantines to curb the coronavirus infections.
If you continue the lawlessness, and it's happening all over the Philippines, maybe I will declare martial law, because you rebels are disrupting the help and supplies being given to the people.
In China, the National Health Commission said half of the imported cases in the country have been discharged from hospitals after recovery. Meanwhile, 91 crew of the Italian cruise ship docked in Japan's southwestern port of Nagasaki have been infected with the coronavirus.
Now, the NATO has urged the Taliban to immediately reduce violence and enter negotiations with the Afghan government. In a statement, the organization also called on Afghan political leaders to resolve their differences and form an inclusive government. NATO went on to say that violence caused by the Taliban is unacceptable, but added that the process of releasing prisoners should be expedited. As of now, the Afghan government has freed nearly 500 Taliban prisoners in exchange for 60 security personnel. The two sides are required to release 6,000 prisoners as part of the Doha peace agreement. The prisoner swap is crucial for initiating intra-Afghan talks that would likely end the decades-long war in the country. South Korea says neighboring North Korea has unusually increased its combat readiness operations. Defense Minister Jong Kyung-do said Pyongyang is carrying out Air Force operations and inspecting its artillery's readiness. State media quoted Kyung-do saying North's maneuvers have heightened regional tensions. He said Pyongyang is concentrating on the developing weapons while remaining unresponsive to offer for talks. Earlier, a military official said the DPRK has increased its surveillance activities in the skies near the demarcation line with China over the Yellow Sea. North Korea has conducted an unprecedented 5 major weapon tests this year, along with smaller scale artillery fighting drills. The United Nations has warned Israel against annexing parts of the occupied West Bank. In a statement, UN Special Coordinator for the Middle East peace process, Nikolai Mladenov, said such unilateral actions are a serious violation of international law and will only lead to more conflict and suffering. Mladenov said Israel's annexation plan will mark a devastating blow to the two-state solution. He said the annexation will close the door to a renewal of negotiations and threaten efforts to advance regional peace. Earlier, the EU's foreign policy chief, Joseph Borrell, said the bloc does not recognize the Israeli sovereignty over the Palestinian territory. Borrell said the EU will continue to monitor the situation and its broader implications and will act accordingly. Israel's unity government has announced it will begin advancing annexation plans from July the 1st. In Germany's court, war crime charges have been read out against 2 members of the Syrian President Bashar al-Assad's security services. The holding of the trial has been hailed by the rights activists. They say this is the first step towards accountability for war criminals who served Damascus during the Syrian civil war. This report has the details.
Thousands of Syrians have accused regime forces of crimes over the course of the brutal civil war, which also includes the indiscriminate bombing of residential areas and medical facilities. These reports have been repeatedly rejected by officials in Damascus, including Assad himself. One suspect has been charged with 58 murders in Germany, while the other with facilitating the torture of at least 30 opposition activists. The 2 also face charges of other heinous crimes against humanity, including torture and rape.
So they committed the crime with cold blood. Now it's everything changed. There is no way to have immunity or to escape from punishment. Immunity time is over for all of them.
Speaking to the press, the plaintiff's lawyer said this trial is a direct message to the Syrian capital. He added his clients came forward against the defendants at great personal risk.
It's above all important that this trial is taking place. I think a lot of people, including our clients, have waited for a very long time that this finally takes off. It was a huge challenge for them to step out of the shadow and to speak about these crimes for the first time ever. That's impossible in Syria and tied to big risks.
It remains to be seen how consequential this trial will be for Syria and its allies. The country is not a signatory to the Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court in The Hague. An estimated 400,000 Syrians have been killed since the war began in 2011.
Turkey says it has killed 8 militants of the Kurdistan Workers' Party in airstrikes during counter-terrorist operation in northern Iraq. The National Defense Ministry said military operations backed by air power were carried out in the Gara region. The ministry said Turkey will continue to destroy weapon caches and shelters of terrorists. It said over 400 Kurdish militants have been killed in northern Iraq over the past 5 months. State media said PKK militants often use northern Iraq to plan cross-border terrorist attacks in Turkey. Yemen's Houthi rebels have ruled out any unrealistic agreements with the Saudi-led coalition fighting in the country. In a meeting of the Supreme Political Council, President Mahdi al-Mashat accused the coalition of escalating violence after agreeing to a truce. The meeting comes after a 2-week ceasefire expired yesterday with no permanent deal in its place to end fighting. The Houthis said coalition forces killed several people last night in 7 raids in the oil-rich Marib province. Yemen's coalition forces have blamed the Houthis for repeatedly violating ceasefire and the failure to agree to an extension. Ecuador says the total number of coronavirus cases in the country is twice as high as previously confirmed. The health ministry said new cases resulting from the delayed testing will be added to the confirmed total of 11,183 infections. Meanwhile, Costa Rica has reported a steady fall in the number of infections, having gone 3 days without any deaths from the virus. This report has the details.
Latin America is suffering but still putting up a great fight against COVID-19 despite its financial and political shortcomings. Brazil's new health minister Nelson Teich has played down the pandemic threat, saying the country has performed better than many others. But health experts say the outbreak is still far from its peak in Brazil as cases and deaths continue to rise sharply. Over in Peru, the number of infections has doubled in the past 9 days, crossing 20,000 as the country's president Martin Vizcarra extended a national quarantine.
The most important thing for a country is its people. It's the health of Peruvians, it's the lives of the people. As a result, the recommendation that we are once again putting out and thinking about what's best for Peruvians is to extend the state of emergency for 2 more weeks.
While helpful in stemming the disease, the lockdowns have exacerbated poverty in Peru and one of the most poorest nations in America, Honduras. In Venezuela, desperate people have resorted to looting and violence, 6 weeks into quarantine and suffering the worst fuel shortage in a decade. Meanwhile, Mexico's President Andrés Manuel López Obrador hopes for the normal resumption of industrial supply chains with the U.S. pending a review by authorities.
Regarding the immigration policy of the United States, we need each other mutually. One couldn't close the border completely because there's a degree of integration that makes it indispensable to keep the border open. In due course, there will be an agreement when they open, and we have pledged, above all with Mexican businesses, to analyze these openings.
Earlier, the Pan American Health Organization and World Health Organization warned the epicenter of the pandemic is moving from Europe towards the Americas.
The U.S. House of Representatives has overwhelmingly approved a $484 billion coronavirus relief bill. U.S. President Donald Trump has promised to sign the measure into law that passed the Democratic-led House by a vote of 388 to 5. The latest of the 4 relief bills will fund small businesses and hospitals amid the pandemic that has killed over 49,000 Americans. It has thrown a record 26 million people out of work. The legislation pushed the total spending response to the crisis to an unprecedented $3 trillion. A handful of lawmakers opposed the legislation, including Democrat Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who urged Congress to do even more.
Only folks that they have urgency around are folks like Ruth's Chris Steakhouse and Shake Shack. Those are the people getting assistance in this bill. You are not trying to fix this bill for mom and pops, and we have to fight to fund hospitals, fighting to fund testing. That is what we're fighting for in this bill. It is unconscionable. If you had urgency, you would legislate like rent was due on May 1st and make sure that we include rent and mortgage relief for our constituents.
Well, EU leaders have agreed to build a €1 trillion emergency fund to help the bloc recover from COVID-19 pandemic. In a video conference to consider proposals, EU leaders rallied around a bigger common budget for 2021 to 27, along with the recovery program. French President Emmanuel Macron argued that the step will put a burden on already heavily indebted countries like Italy, Belgium and Greece. EU leaders also approved over €500 billion in an immediate scheme to protect jobs, businesses, and offer cheap credit to the governments.
We also agreed to work towards establishing a recovery fund which is needed and urgent. This fund should be of a sufficient magnitude, targeted towards the sectors and geographical parts of Europe most affected, and be dedicated to dealing with this unprecedented crisis.
The Saudi presidency of the group of 20 major economies has called for more funds for the coronavirus response. In a statement, the presidency said $1.8 billion have been donated towards a target of $8 billion. The G20 Secretariat said the donations were made by countries, philanthropic organizations and the private sector. Saudi G20 member Sherpa Fahad said global solidarity and cooperation is needed to fight the pandemic. He said it is the time for the bloc to support world efforts for a vaccine and other therapeutic measures to combat COVID-19. Meanwhile, the G20 tourism ministers will hold a virtual meeting today to discuss impact of the virus on the travel sector. It's time for a short break. We'll be back with more stories. Stay tuned. Welcome back. The World Health Organization says it will announce a landmark collaboration today to speed the development of a coronavirus vaccine. In a statement, the health agency said the initiative with the partners aims to make technologies against the virus accessible to everyone worldwide. In addition to 194 UN states, the Gavi Vaccine Alliance, Gates Foundation and the Global Fund are among traditionally large donors to the agency. Meanwhile, Canada has pledged $782 million to develop and eventually mass-produce vaccine to fight coronavirus. Yesterday, the UK started its human trials for the COVID-19 vaccine. The trial drug has been developed by the University of Oxford and Imperial. In another rather devastating development, a potential drug for the coronavirus failed in its first randomized clinical trial. There had been widespread hope that remdesivir can treat COVID-19, but a Chinese trial showed that the drug had not been successful. The Rolling Stones have released their first single in 8 years dedicated to the coronavirus pandemic. The song Living in a Ghost Town is powered with a riff by Keith Richards. The video shows deserted streets and subway stations in London, Los Angeles, Kyoto, among other cities. Song live was so beautiful. Now we all got locked down, feel like a ghost living in a ghost town. In a statement, Sir Mick Jagger said the band thought they will resonate with the times the world is living in. The band said the track was initially recorded a year ago in LA but was finished in lockdown. Richards said the song was completed via satellite before being released. Well, millions of people around the world are observing the holy month of Ramadan from today. Details in this report.
This year, the fasting month has arrived amid social restrictions in place due to the coronavirus pandemic. Many Muslim-majority countries, including Indonesia, Saudi Arabia and UAE, have asked their citizens to stay at home.
Salat dimanapun.
For me, no matter where we are, the prayers must go on, even though we cannot pray in the mosque. The religious heads in the country have advised us to pray in our home. As a follower, all we can do is follow the instructions and do as we are told. As for the rest, we will leave it to God.
Para ulama di negeri ini.
Saudi Arabia's King Salman said he is saddened that Muslims cannot pray at mosques because of social restrictions, but in certain countries of the world, including Pakistan, the government urged people to pray at home but did not impose a ban. Medics have warned of dire consequences.
The Prime Minister has said that any mosque which does not follow the SOPs will be closed. Mr. Prime Minister, sir, it will be too late by then. When you realize this after a week or 10 days, lots of people will be searching for hospital beds. Many hospitals will be having ventilator problems.
In Ramadan, observant Muslims refrain from eating and drinking from dawn to dusk. The month of Ramadan will begin from tomorrow in Pakistan and certain other countries.
The UK's economy is crumbling under the strain of coronavirus lockdown as the government borrowing surges to the highest levels in peacetime history. Bank of England interest rate setter Jan Verlaeg said Britain's economy is experiencing the fastest and deepest contraction in centuries. But Verlaeg said the economic situation will have exacerbated if the government and Bank of England had not used unprecedented financial firepower. The UK's PMI plummeted to a new record low at just 12.9 for April, down from 36 in March. This was far below economists' forecasts and well short of the 38.1 reading recorded in the depths of the 2008 financial crisis. The European Bank for Reconstruction and Development has announced a $22.7 billion package to fight the COVID-19 pandemic. In a statement, the bank said the comprehensive package will cover the period between 2020 and 2021. It said the components, including resilience framework, trade finance, restructuring, support for new clients, and vital infrastructure. The package will focus on sectors hardest hit by the crisis, such as tourism, finance, manufacturing, and agribusiness. Another weather situation from around the globe. And that's all for now. For the latest updates, you can follow us on social media at Indus.News.